In early 1933, the Soviet Union was already surrounded by death, though it rarely admitted it. Forced collectivization had shattered agriculture across vast regions. Famine was spreading, silently and unevenly, from village to village. At the same time, the state was preparing another campaign, one aimed not at food, but at people. Joseph Stalin's government had become obsessed with the idea of socially harmful elements. The term was deliberately vague. It included beggars, petty criminals, the homeless, former merchants, unemployed workers, religious figures, and anyone without proper internal documents. It also included people who simply looked out of place. Cities like Moscow and Leningrad were seen as contaminated. They were overcrowded, restless, and increasingly difficult to control. The solution, according to Soviet planners, was removal. Police sweeps began quietly, then expanded. Officers patrolled streets, markets, and train stations. People were stopped and asked for documents. If they could not produce the correct papers, they were detained. Explanations were irrelevant. Protests were ignored. Some detainees assumed it was a mistake. Others thought they would be released after questioning. Few realized they had already been erased from normal legal reality. The official plan was resettlement. Those arrested would be deported east, to Siberia. There, they would be transformed into labor settlers. They would clear land, build villages, and contribute to the economy. On paper, it was a rational solution to multiple problems. In practice, the plan was barely thought through. The agencies responsible for transportation, food, housing, and supervision were poorly coordinated. Targets were set without infrastructure. Quotas mattered more than logistics. Speed mattered more than survival. By May 1933, thousands had been arrested. Many had no criminal record. Some were teenagers. Others were elderly. Families were separated without explanation. They were loaded into freight trains under armed guard. The cars were overcrowded, dark, and filthy. There were no seats, no sanitation. Food was minimal and irregular. As the trains moved east, people began to understand that this was not temporary. The journey lasted days. Illness spread. Some died before the trains even reached Siberia. When the doors finally opened in Tomsk, the survivors were disoriented, weak, and afraid. They were told they were being transferred again. None of them were told where. From Tomsk, the deportees were marched to the river. Barges waited along the Ob, large and slow-moving, guarded by soldiers with rifles. The prisoners were herded aboard, packed tightly on wooden decks. Food supplies were already dwindling. Clean water was scarce. Many had not eaten properly in days. The barges pushed north along the river, passing endless stretches of forest and marshland. There were no towns, no signs of habitation, just water, trees, and sky. After several days, the vessels slowed and turned toward a low strip of land in the river. This was Nazino Island. It was long and narrow, barely rising above the waterline. Much of it was swamp. The ground was cold, muddy, and unstable. Thin trees grew unevenly across the island, offering little shelter. There were no buildings, no docks, no signs that anyone had ever lived there. The guards ordered the deportees off the barges. As people stepped onto the island, confusion spread. Some asked where the settlement was. Others asked for tools. No answers came. Then the barges pulled away. The guards remained stationed along the shoreline and at the riverbanks. Their role was clear: prevent escape. Survival was not their responsibility. Soon after arrival, officials distributed food. It was flour, no bread, no cooked rations, just sacks of raw flour dumped onto the ground. There were no stoves, no pots, no firewood prepared in advance. People mixed the flour with river water in their hands and tried to swallow it. The paste clogged throats. Many choked. Others became violently ill within hours. The nights were freezing. There were no tents, no blankets. People lay directly on the ground, pressed together for warmth. Frost formed on clothing. Those who collapsed often did not wake up. Deaths began almost immediately. At first, the bodies were ignored. Then they became obstacles. Then they became something else. By the end of the first week, Nazino Island had no structure left to collapse, because none had ever existed. What collapsed instead was restraint. Criminals among the deportees quickly recognized the situation. They formed small groups, then larger ones. They controlled the flour. They stole clothing, shoes, anything of value. The weak were stripped first. Guards watched from a distance. They had no orders to intervene in internal violence. Their concern was escape, not order. Some people tried to flee anyway. They ran toward the river and entered the water. The Ob was wide, fast, and ice-cold. Most could not swim far. Some drowned within minutes. Others were swept downstream. Several were shot by guards as they entered the water. Bodies floated past the island. Hunger intensified. The flour ran out quickly. There was nothing to forage, no animals to hunt. The ground was too cold for roots or plants. Rumors began quietly. People whispered about disappearances, about individuals who followed armed groups into the trees and did not return, about screams heard at night. Soon the whispers were unnecessary. Cannibalism began with the dead. Bodies were cut apart discreetly at first, usually after nightfall. Flesh was removed quickly. Guards noticed mutilated corpses but did nothing. Reporting upward meant admitting failure. Then the dead were no longer enough. Survivors later described organized killings. Victims were selected deliberately. The sick, the injured, the isolated. Some were tied to trees. Some were stabbed. Others were mutilated while still alive. One woman was discovered with her calf muscles cut away. She was still breathing when found. She died shortly afterward. Human flesh was dried over small fires. Bones were hidden in the forest. This continued for weeks. Nazino Island had become a place where survival required brutality, and brutality went unpunished. News of Nazino Island did not reach Moscow immediately. It surfaced slowly, through rumors carried by guards, boat crews, and nearby villagers. Local residents along the river began hearing stories that sounded impossible. People eating people, bodies mutilated, an island of death. Some refused to believe it. Others demanded intervention. Eventually, an internal investigation was ordered. When officials arrived on Nazino Island, they were confronted with undeniable evidence. Corpses lay unburied across the ground. Survivors were skeletal, barely able to stand. Violence was still ongoing. Investigators documented cases of cannibalism in detail. They recorded testimonies from guards and survivors. They counted the dead. Out of approximately 6,000 deportees, more than 2,000 were confirmed dead. Hundreds more were missing and presumed killed. The remaining survivors were evacuated. They were loaded onto barges and redistributed to labor camps and settlements across Siberia. Many did not survive the journey. Others died shortly after from disease, exhaustion, or injuries sustained on the island. Less than half of the original deportees were alive by the end of the year. The investigation concluded that the resettlement had been poorly organized. Several local officials received mild punishments. No senior planners were held accountable. The final report was classified. Nazino Island was erased from public memory. For decades, Nazino Island did not officially exist. It was absent from textbooks, archives, and public discussion. Survivors rarely spoke. Those who did were ignored or silenced. The Soviet state moved on. The island itself was abandoned. The river continued to flow around it. Trees grew back. The ground absorbed what had happened. There are no monuments there today. No warning signs, no mass graves marked. Only mud, forest, and silence. Nazino Island was not a myth. It was not a secret experiment. It was a bureaucratic disaster driven by ideology and indifference. Thousands of people were sent into the wilderness with nothing. When hunger stripped away restraint, the state looked away. What happened there wasn't caused by madness or evil alone. It was caused by planning without responsibility, authority without accountability, and a system willing to sacrifice human lives for administrative convenience. Nazino Island remains one of the clearest examples of how quickly civilization can vanish, and how horror does not require monsters, only hunger, only fear, and permission to abandon responsibility.